We're really excited to be welcoming Joanne here this afternoon, who is going to talk to us about, sort of a forward look into what to expect around the implementation of the right to read and perhaps the upcoming revisions to the language curriculum. So thank you so much, Joanne, for being here this afternoon. We're really looking forward to the conversation.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity, Lawrence. I'm happy to help in any way I can. That's the goal of our organization, is to provide as much support as we can in Ontario and Canada if they want to attend any of our sessions. So I'd like to begin our workshop today by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. We acknowledge that IDA Ontario and the Ontario Principals Council serve citizens on the traditional territories of the First Nations of Ontario, the Ojibwe Chippewa, Anishinaabe, Iroquois, Mohawk, Huron-Wendat, Attawandaron, Cree and Moose Cree, Oneida, and Algonquin peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this province. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and the ancestral lands on which we learn, share, and live. So thank you so much for that introduction. I see some familiar faces. Hello, Sharon. I'm so glad you're here. And thank you to everyone who's attending today. And we are recording. So if you feel that this has been beneficial for you and you'd like to share this with any of your colleagues, Brad and Lawrence will be sharing the recording link and the resources that I'll be including in this webinar today. So first, I would like to give everyone attending a brief perspective on how we've come to this point in literacy education, including how learning to read is a human right in Canada. I'll also provide knowledge-based information so that you're well equipped to dialogue with school personnel about reading science and structured literacy. I would also like to offer our administrators starting points in relation to the recommendations of the right to read, as Lawrence was saying, and hopefully links to the new curriculum. We are meeting again August 18th for a full day with the Ontario Principals Council, if you're interested. That day will provide more opportunity for a deeper dive into organizing a school into the science of reading, because that is what is going to be encouraged by the new curriculum, and that is what the mandate is with the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report. So without further ado, I will continue. There we go. My slides aren't moving. Oh, there we go. They moved too fast this time. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. So to begin, here's a brief history. In 2012, there was a legal decision made in British Columbia called the Moore decision. It confirmed the human rights laws in Canada protect the right of all students to an equal opportunity to learn to read. The decision was lauded as a significant victory for students with disabilities, particularly students with reading disabilities. Many hoped that it would act as a catalyst for systemic change in Ontario. That didn't quite happen. And in 2019, 7 years later, the Ontario Human Rights Commission launched its public inquiry into the right to read after hearing widespread complaints about the inability to access effective reading instruction in Ontario schools. At the time, Chief Commissioner Renu Mandane, stated that, and I'm quoting, "Reading is the foundation for success in school, work, and a life. Learning to read is not a privilege, it is a human right. This inquiry aims to assess whether school boards use evidence-based approaches to meet their human rights obligations." That is to teach kids to read. So our goal is to have everyone taught to read using an approach based on reading science or peer-reviewed research. And I'm able to provide you with the information you need for that today. As administrators, we have tools to offer you. And as teachers, we also have tools to gain background information on how you teach kids to read. So I will continue. As a matter of context, I would like to show you that Ontario is not the only place where this change in literacy education is happening. New Brunswick has a new curriculum, and wherever you see green is a link. And I've provided links to the New Brunswick curriculum, the Alberta curriculum, the New South Wales curriculum in Australia, and the United Kingdom curriculum. Here in the United States, there has been legislation in all of the states that has to do with dyslexia. Every state has a state education agency. And as you can see, all of the states have legislation. And these light blue states have screening legislation. And these other blue states have pre-service requirements for teachers. These states, the blue ones, have in-service requirements for teachers. And these states, the light blue states, have intervention requirements for schools. And these gray states have legislation for all of these. So it's not just Ontario that has been suffering from graduates, 30% of graduates coming out of schools not having the appropriate reading skills to succeed in all of the domains of society, choosing a career, living a competent life, reading, dealing with life. So what we want is to build graduates who will be able to make the career choices they would like because they have the literacy skills that we can provide to them. So what did the Ontario Human Rights Commission do? It audited a representative sample of school boards, 8 of them. It audited all of the 13 faculties of education in Ontario. It surveyed thousands of parents and educators. It consulted with experts across Ontario, Canada, and internationally, experts on reading science. And the Human Rights Commission held public hearings and community meetings and private interviews to obtain the information they obtained. The extended version of the report is over 500 pages, but there is a nice executive summary that's more easy to handle in terms of the breadth and depth. And it's a great summary. I'd like to show you, this is Emily Moorhead. She testified at one of the hearings, stating that she could not, as a really competent teacher, she could not teach her child to read because he had reading challenges. And she felt, as a teacher, that she should have the skills to be able to teach her child to read, and she didn't have them. It was quite frustrating. And this is one of the revelations that came about from the Human Rights Inquiry. And it's that teachers, we still have a lot of people coming in, and that's interfering with my reading my slide. I'm just going to go with my other view on my other screen here. Here we go. Teachers are not given sufficient education and support. Currently, Ontario teachers are required to deliver a curriculum that is inconsistent with science-based core curriculum that meets the right to read. So I'm not here to say teachers are incompetent. I'm here to say I have never met a teacher who doesn't want to do the best job he or she can to teach kids to read. Unfortunately, teachers' colleges have not been able to provide the training for this because they're basing themselves on a curriculum that is based on whole language and balanced literacy. And unfortunately, science has taught us that balanced literacy has not been effective to teach all of our students to read. It's been effective for about 62% of the students. And we got that data from Freedom of Information requests that we made to EQAO. I will give you more detail about that. But we can teach 95% of our students to read well and have only less than 5% of students struggle and require tier 3 intervention. So I'll go into more detail about this as I go on. Trying to get my slide to go. Here we go. There is conflicting information out there. The PISA reports show that Canadian students are reading super well. And we have articles written. This is from the Education Reporter, Canadian high school students among top performers in reading according to international ranking. But then we have the Human Rights Commission saying that Ontario is systematically failing students with reading disabilities and many other students. I should point out that they really went deeply into the research. They delayed their publication of the report by almost a whole year because they really needed to go into the curriculum, the teachers' colleges, into the research in order to show why it is that they did what they did and provide the recommendations that they did. The reading science is very, very strong in this report. So what's happening? Which story is true? Well, it's true that 95% of people can learn to read well if you provide the appropriate reading instruction. And this here is a green link. It will link you to the research that shows this, all right? And we, as I said, freedom of information requests, we hired a statistician and we worked really hard analyzing the data from EQAO in order to see that since 2005, EQAO reading scores have steadily increased. However, they've increased the use of assistive technology to have it read for the students and have students dictate so that they didn't write. 18% of students did this in 2019 during the testing. So 18% of students did this. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. 38% of students in grade 3 did not meet the provincial standard, completing the EQAO testing independently. 38% of our students. That's high. And it doesn't have to be this high. It could be less than 5% if we begin appropriate reading instruction in kindergarten. So I'll give you more detail about this. So this 38% is represented here in our slide. I have to minimize there you go, the participants so that I could see my slide more accurately. As you can see, the yellow and black stripes are representative of the increased number of students using technology to do the EQAO testing. So if you add this last column up in 2019, 38% of students, or only 62% of students were able to complete EQAO and achieve a level 3 independently. So 38% of students did not. That's quite significant. And our next slide shows kids with IEPs. So what it is showing, and I'm going to go to my own information here on this. Here we go. Here we go. The data shows that reading outcomes for students with IEPs, we have increasing numbers of students receiving technology and scribing in order to complete reading and writing tasks on EQAO. So are we really measuring reading? I'm going to stop sharing now and tell you this. I was in the education system until 2006 when I retired. So from 1989 to 2006, I got my specialist in reading, I got my specialist in spec ed, and I got my specialist in French as a second language. I became a principal, I was a principal. In all that teaching career and school career, I learned that if I was told, and I believed, that kids who struggled to read couldn't learn to read, and therefore we were to give them technology. I was wrong. And we have thousands of teachers who've taken training with IDA Ontario. And I'm not exaggerating, thousands of teachers, Sharon can attest to that. Most of the teachers who take training in reading strategies based on reading science are really, some are panicked, some are disappointed, some are depressed, some think back to the students they could have helped, but they didn't because they didn't know any better. We thought we could just give them computers and they could cope, but they never learned to read well. And these kids are relegated to poverty, limited career choices, often not graduating from university much less, I'm so sorry, not often graduating from college, never university, and several times, I would say a great majority of the kids who don't graduate from high school are very poor readers. It's just a predictor. The majority of people in prison have, I would say, a grade 3 reading level, and that's in research as well. I could provide that for you. So we're well-intended. I was a well-intended teacher. I got my reading specialist. I had my spec ed specialist, and I did not know how to teach a non-reader to read. No one ever told me how. So I went back to special education from being a principal because that was my passion in 2010. And I went to a workshop and we were asked, who here, raise your hand if you can teach a non-reader to read. And none of us could raise our hands. And we were all spec ed teachers. So I went about training myself, finding training, paying for the training, doing it on my own time, and learning how to teach non-readers to read. And that's never been a more gratifying experience for me. We all have our passions, and that is mine. So I want to go back to our PowerPoint because I just want to say this is not about teachers who don't want to teach reading well. It's about teachers who've never learned how and who've never received the training. And we are changing that now with the recommendations of the Right to Read and with the new curriculum that's coming out. So PISA scores. How come we have nice PISA scores? And PISA, I should tell you, it stands for Program for International School Assessment. The reason our PISA scores are so good is that 22% of our students, they're not being recorded in the results. They're absent or not completing enough questions or not taking the test at all. In other countries, that's not allowed. All of the students are forced to take these PISA tests, or a very, very small minority is allowed to not take it. I would assume students with severe disabilities. But this is why our scores are good. It's because 22% of our students aren't being recorded in those results. All right, so a little more detail. 33% of the students who completed the 2018 PISA assessment recorded a level 2 or below. And this is reflected here in this data. 13% of Ontario grade 10 students who completed the PISA assessment scored below a grade 3-4 reading ability. And then 33% of Ontario grade 10 students who completed it scored or were working up below grade 7-8 level. So our PISA scores aren't that good. Now, so multiple sources of evidence suggest that approximately 1 in 3 Ontario students are not reading at grade level. So if you would like more information on where we obtain this data, I would be happy to provide it. If Lawrence wants to give my email address in the chat, I would be happy to interact with anyone who would like more information on that. So going back to my notes, I would like to tell you that the good news is that the Human Rights Commission is providing us with information, and the new curriculum is providing us with a framework for equitable early reading instruction. First, science-based curriculum and classroom instruction. Second, early universal screening to identify students at risk for developing reading difficulties. And third, targeted intervention for all students identified through screening. So I'm going to have a lot more detail about screening in a few minutes. I'd like to show you a positive experience that happened in North Vancouver. This study happened in 2003. Linda Siegel and her colleague, Dr. Lasso, conducted a study where they intervened with kindergarten students. They did early screening with these kids, and at the time, 23.8% of the students displayed at-risk behaviors for reading. And 2 years later, after early intervention with science-based instruction, only 4.2% of these students needed continued needed needed continued intervention, or were reading below grade level. That's amazing. And that is what the research is showing in many instances. If you go to number 880 in the Right to Read report in the references, you'll find more studies that show this. Now, this is for English first language students, and for English language learners, the impact is even greater. 37% of the kids in kindergarten showed risk behaviors in reading, but then by the time they were in grade 2, after 2 years of intervention with reading instruction reflecting reading science, only 3.7% of the kids were reading below grade level. This is not impossible. This is totally doable, and happily so. I should tell you, I'll stop share for now. I am offering at the end of this webinar a whole list of webinars and resources where you can see teachers using structured literacy in kindergarten, providing lesson plans and resources, using structured literacy in grade 1 and primary grades, and using structured literacy more in JK and SK with Emily Moorhead, her lesson plan template, her resources. It's really fabulous what is happening in Ontario with success. These are pioneer teachers who were so curious about how to best teach kids to read and with reading science. And now they're the ones mentoring us in using reading science in our schools and implementing the recommendations of the Right to Read. It's exciting. I'm really thrilled, and we should all be thrilled that these ladies are so generous and with no payment at all, providing us with these webinars and resources that are helping our kids learn to read in all of Ontario. All right. What we're learning is that if we invest in early reading, we significantly reduce the social and economic costs of low literacy. We improve equity outcomes. And I know principals, I used to have to write them, school improvement plans. It probably will be encouraged that your school improvement plans will be related to the new curriculum and the Right to Read inquiry report recommendations. And equity is huge, so important when we reflect on how we've intervened with kids in racialized sectors of society. We have data that shows this. Children from groups protected under the code disproportionately suffer the effects of failing to use evidence-based approaches to reading and supporting struggling readers. Their parents are not always having the same access to resources, and these students rely on public education to give them strong foundation in reading. Up until now, it's been common practice, and I'm not saying it's happening in your individual school, but kids get on wait lists. They can't receive any intervention or accommodations unless they've had a psychoeducational assessment. And the wait lists are so long that parents are told, go get a private psych ed and come back, and we will begin an IEP and we'll begin intervention and support. It was like that for me as a principal and as a teacher before 2006. I'm not saying that's still happening now, but actually the Right to Read inquiry report states that it is still happening in many school boards, maybe not yours. And if that's the case, I'm very happy. But if it is still happening in your school board, we have guidance, we have resources. It doesn't have to continue that way. All right, let's continue. So there are 5 benchmarks and systemic issues which were addressed in the Right to Read inquiry report: curriculum and instruction, early screening, reading interventions, accommodations, assessment. So I will take each one of the benchmarks, share the findings, share the recommendations, and share what the implications could be for you as an administrator. I'd also like to say, Lawrence, if you would like to interrupt me at any moment in time, I wouldn't be offended. I'd be happy to answer any questions that could be coming up. Okay, thanks, Lawrence. So regarding curriculum and instruction, it was found that students are not being taught foundational word reading skills using an explicit and systematic approach to teaching. Is it cumulative? Is it systematic? Is it monitored? There are some people who claim that this is offered in their programs. It's not. So you have to be so careful in choosing the approach that you're encouraging in your schools. So the Right to Read Inquiry report showed that phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding, and word reading and fluency were not being addressed in most school boards. So what's happening in schools? The balanced literacy approach is what we have. And I've got special notes written here because I want to be careful, because I used to be my specialist in reading was in whole language and balanced literacy. I really thought that if kids love to read, if we read to them a whole bunch, if we asked them to substitute a word in a sentence, if we asked them to check the pictures, to guess at words, I thought this was teaching reading. And it wasn't. I did a bad job in that. There are students I'm thinking of today that I could have helped better, but I didn't know any better. And now we do know better. Actually, the science has been there for a long, long time. It just doesn't filter down from Harvard and Yale and OISE and Halifax and BC. We have great researchers, Calgary, Alberta. We have Georgiou there, a fantastic doctor who's helped to consult for the new curriculum over there. We have great Canadians and great Americans and great Australians and great United Kingdom people who have been doing reading science for a long time, but it just hasn't filtered down to the curriculum. So it's happening now, though. So I'd like to show you, this is the 3 cueing system that we've been using in our province for 20 years. Almost 20 years. Actually, the new curriculum, the curriculum from 2006 has this. The curriculum from before that had it, because I was using this in 1990 when I graduated from Teachers College, 1989. And I got my reading specialist pretty quickly right after, because that's always been my passion. So there's research here that demonstrates that this teaching guessing is what we do with poor readers. Poor readers do that. These are habits of poor readers, and we've been teaching our kids habits of poor readers instead of systematic strategies that can be learned with phonemic awareness and phonics and fluency, building vocabulary, teaching systematic spelling, teaching good writing. These are the components of structured literacy. So if you need to work with teachers to have them understand why balanced literacy is really harmful in teaching kids to read, there's research here, Tunmer and more research. So curriculum instruction, and back to this slide. Also, at the end of this presentation, there's an article written by Perry Klein where he addresses this issue in an article that he has published recently. Perry Klein is from Western University here in London. So, findings in curriculum and instruction. Teachers must have sufficient and ongoing professional development to deliver a high-quality, science-based Tier 1 core curriculum as designed. Universal design for learning ethically obligates us to provide the best teaching possible in reading to all kids in Tier 1. If we do that, we can even intervene at a Tier 2 level in our classrooms in small groups. And then only very few students, 1 in a class, maybe 2 in a class, will require Tier 3 intervention. Presently, it's 10 kids in a class who are not coping well with reading because they haven't learned the foundational skills of reading. We want to change that. The American Federation of Teachers is a union of education professionals, and they have recognized the importance of preparing teachers to deliver science-based reading instruction for both student outcomes and to empower teachers and support their professionalism and autonomy. The Human Rights Commission also heard from unions, and our unions support the fact that teachers want to learn how to best teach reading to students. So we want to be lauding our unions in that regard. So what is the science of reading? It's a body of scientific research that has studied how reading skills develop and how to ensure the highest degree of success in teaching all children to read. It includes results from thousands of peer-reviewed studies and meta-analyses that use rigorous scientific methods. It includes expertise from many fields, including education, special education, developmental psychology, educational psychology, cognitive science, and more. It's also known as reading science, research-based, evidence-based, science-based, and structured literacy. And the Human Rights Inquiry report also shows the interchangeability of these terms, and that's okay. The goal of reading, of course, is comprehension. And this is called the simple view of reading. By the way, my notes, my speaker notes are also being given with this PowerPoint so that principals, if they want to give this presentation to staff, if they want some of their staff to help them in giving these presentations, if you have division leaders who are working with teachers who are cognizant of reading science, if you want to use these tools in your schools, you're welcome to them. That's our goal, is to help as many kids as we can learn to read. And that means giving our stuff away, and we do. All right. So here's the simple view of reading. Decoding and language comprehension equal reading comprehension. So far in balanced literacy, we've done a great job of language comprehension, but we've neglected systematic instruction of decoding and fluency and vocabulary instruction and systematic spelling. So there are 6 elements of structured literacy. We have phonemic awareness, phonics, we have building vocabulary, fluency, comprehension, and writing and spelling. These are necessary for kids to maximize their comprehension in reading and spelling. And I'm not saying I'm not saying you should throw out the balanced literacy readers. They're good for reading to students, for building story sense, for showing beautiful illustrations that go with stories. We shouldn't throw them out, but those shouldn't be the readers kids are introduced to reading with. Decodable readers are what we should be using to begin. And now there are lists and lists of decodable readers on our website. If you Google them, they're coming out with more and more decodable readers in French and English now. It's an exciting time in literacy. And once kids get their foundational skills in reading, then we can have them read these cute balanced literacy readers that we have in our kits. But first, they must learn to decode systematically from short vowels, V-E words, multisyllabic words with short vowels, and then multisyllabic words with long vowels and short vowels and vowel consonant E. It's a gradual progression with scopes and sequences. Different approaches have a different scope and sequence. What the research is saying is, as long as you have a scope and sequence, as long as you've had early screening, if you follow carefully and progress monitor according to the needs of your students, you will succeed in teaching kids to read well. So all that to explain the simple view of reading. We also have the reading rope, which is a little more detailed than the simple view of reading. And I'm going to go to my own notes on this. Here we go. The word recognition strand right here with the includes decoding, sight recognition, and phonological awareness. For some of you, sight recognition might be related to sight words. There's a new definition of sight words now. Any word that a child can recognize quickly is a sight word. Heart words, if you look up heart words in Reading Rockets, yes, I think it's Reading Rockets. It's a fantastic website for school teachers and principals about teaching reading. They have heart words, and they teach us how to teach heart words. And that's lovely. Usually these heart words don't follow the phonics rules as well as regular words would. For example, the word was, if it followed the rules, it would be W-U-Z, was, but it's written W-A-S. And sometimes the S can have a Z sound, but it's usually before an E, a silent E, like the word wise or the word fuse. Anyway, but the S can have a Z sound. So what we teach students with these heart words is they're mostly phonetically regular. They do follow the rules, except for one of the sounds in the word, usually. Sometimes two of the letters aren't representative of the sounds they should be making. But anyway, there are really great ways of teaching kids these irregular words. And language comprehension. In the second half of the rope, vocabulary knowledge, background knowledge, language structures, literacy knowledge, and verbal reasoning. Together, that makes for skilled reading and the best reading comprehension. So this is Hollis Scarborough, who created the reading rope in 2001. So when schools fail to teach students to read, then comprehension is reduced. Students are at increased risk for general academic difficulties, limited educational opportunities, unemployment, poverty, crime, mental health issues. I have to tell you this. I went to the London, Ontario Right to Read inquiry meeting when they were hearing testimonials from families. There was a pediatric psychiatrist who testified. And she said 80% of her clientele, children who attempt suicide, are students with reading struggles. So we cannot understate the importance of teaching kids to read when they're very young. It's the easiest time. It's so important for their self-esteem. If we wait till grade 3, when they have a psych ed, or grade 4, before we start helping them to learn to read, they've been told that they're reading failures for 5 years. JK, SK, 1, 2, and 3. Imagine being told every day that you're a reading failure, or feeling that you are because everyone around you can read, but you can't. That is the psychology behind non-reading, struggling with reading. I suspected that, but I had never really heard it that bluntly as when I heard it from that pediatric psychiatrist that day in London during the hearings for the Right to Read inquiry. So important that we teach our kids to read very young, that we do early screening and early intervention. So back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. So comprehension is important. We've been very good at teaching textual comprehension, but did you know that teaching vocabulary before we introduce a text or as we introduce a text is very important? Teaching kids to distinguish types of sentences and to study syntax is very important for comprehension, because little words like yet, furthermore, or despite will change the meaning of a sentence. But certain children don't get that. They need to be taught explicitly about syntax with sentences. Construction of knowledge is very important. So I've given you here a 2019 research paper that Una Malcolm has given us today so that we can understand how to best teach comprehension. We're hoping that this will be reflected in the new curriculum. So recommendations. The Human Rights Commission recommended that the Ministry of Education work with external experts to revise the kindergarten program, the language arts curriculum, and related instructional guides to remove the use of 3 cueing systems for word reading. And we want all curriculum to require mandatory, explicit, systematic, and direct instruction in foundational word reading skills in tiers 1, 2, and 3, recommendations 27 to 30. So the recommendations also state that there should be in-service teacher professional learning, and that teacher education programs address the importance of word reading accuracy and efficiency for reading comprehension, and that they demonstrate how accurate and efficient word reading develops, and that they show how to teach foundational word reading and spelling skills in the classroom in order to promote the importance of teaching foundational word reading skills to promote equality among all students. The OHRC further recommends that teacher education programs better equip teachers who are qualified to teach kindergarten to grade 6 to deliver the critical components of word reading instruction. So, the Ontario kindergarten program. There's this debate because kindergarten is optional. But is it optional for a teacher teaching kindergarten to choose? Should a teacher choose to teach foundational skills in reading, or should a teacher choose to continue play-based learning entirely without teaching foundational skills? Well, what we'd like to tell you is that it's possible to continue play-based learning and teach foundational skills in reading in kindergarten. And this was demonstrated, I'll go over here, to Kate Wynn's. Kate Wynn, we had 2,200 teachers signing up August 4th of last summer. 2,200 teachers attended this webinar. It was free. Kate Wynn gave it, and she demonstrated how she made 5 key changes in her play-based kindergarten that made all her students become readers. 5 changes in her classroom. And these changes reflect these recommendations of the Right to Read report. So it's possible to teach early reading in kindergarten. It's actually essential for reading success because kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2 is when most reading instruction should be happening with phonemic awareness and phonics, early spelling skills. So we're in the benchmark of early screening. Now, I'd like to ask Lawrence. Lawrence, how are the questions? Anything right now?
I don't see any questions in the chat box right now.
Wonderful. Okay. I'm open if anyone would like to ask. Early screening is the second benchmark. And here, what was found by the Human Rights Commission is that Ontario does not currently have universal evidence-based early screening to identify at-risk students. We have a member in our audience today who coordinated early screening with hundreds and hundreds of students in her school board using the DIBBLES, which is a free early screening tool. And they were able to identify at-risk students and begin early intervention with their students in Ottawa. And I laud you for all your efforts. I won't name you because I'm not sure you want to be named, but we're really happy you're here today. And if at some point this person would like to share her knowledge and resources, I think she would, because she's a volunteer for IDA Ontario as well. We can connect you if you have questions about this. This current approach for early screening in Ontario is inconsistent, ad hoc, and relies mostly on non-evidence-based reading assessments. Many at-risk students are not being identified in a timely fashion, nor are they receiving early intervention or any at all. When can we screen? Well, screening can begin in JK. And because kindergartens are combined now, it can happen for JK and SK students. And we have research here that shows this in this link. So what's recommended? It's recommended that the Ministry of Education mandate and standardize evidence-based screening of foundational skills, focusing on word reading accuracy and fluency in grades K to 2. Stephen Lecce made that announcement several months ago. It's being mandated, and it's obligated or obligatory starting in September. And there will be training provided. There are stakeholders who are preparing training at this moment, and there will be available resources for schools and principals and teachers in August. So we will be able to begin this journey of early screening and early intervention in September. The OHRC also recommended that we identify students at risk and provide immediate, effective, evidence-based interventions. And teachers should be given adequate professional development and be given the necessary time to complete these assessments. So that is a juggling act. I've been a principal, I know, but it's doable. We use librarians and teachers' assistants, and we combine classes to provide release time. But what I'd like to tell you is the fantastic thing about early screening is that it's much less arduous than the diagnostic assessments that have been used up until now, much less time consuming, and very pleasant for the students. It can be fun for the students. It's not humiliating at all. I would encourage you to see this. Becoming a Literacy Leader series, Rethinking Assessment Using Universal Screening Data to Inform Instruction. I've given the link, 3 webinars where 3 teachers provide their own experiences with early screening and how they intervene with their students at a very early time in their school year. So in order to prevent reading difficulties. So it's very doable, and I know many people who can attest to this. And again, if Lawrence is providing my email, I'll be happy to communicate with any of you about this. PPM 155 is an issue because it limits formal diagnostic assessments, but screening is not a diagnostic assessment. It's a picture in time of what a student can do, and it helps to identify students who are at risk. From those students, there might be students showing severe symptoms of risk, and those are the kids we intervene with quickly, and we see how they respond. If they don't respond well to early and quick intervention, we refer them for a more in-depth assessment. But teachers aren't assessing kids, they're screening kids. We arrange for staff training again, and we plan communication with parents. I'm sorry, I've got, I've been able to take away some of the, I had this black bar over my slides because people are coming in still. So I clicked on the X and I think I'm okay now. Implications for administrators. So it's really difficult when we have teachers thinking that screening is diagnostic. It's not that. It's not as time consuming. It can be very user-friendly, and we have resources to help you with this if you would like some. Right. The next benchmark is reading interventions. And I'm going to go to my own slide here before I continue, just to make sure I don't neglect to provide any detail. Here we go. Okay. So what they found with reading interventions at the OHRC was that intervention is most effective when delivered in kindergarten and grade 1. Broken record, but that is the truth, and that's in the research. Yet in Ontario, the most effective interventions are only available, if at all, after grade 3 or much later. It's a big problem. And maybe that's not happening in your schools anymore. And if that's the case, fantastic. But in their analyses of 8 school boards and the surveys of parents and teachers and professionals in schools, it was revealed that intervention wasn't being given until grade 3 or much later. Many more students need reading interventions because classroom instruction in word reading is not based on reading science. And it's like I said before, if we begin in kindergarten, we're going to be preventing a huge amount of problems, many reading struggles. Instead of having 38% of our students not reading at grade level, we'll have less than 5% of our students not reading at grade level. The need for reading interventions exceeds available spots at the moment, but that can change. We can prevent this. So, Dr. Stephanie Stoller gave a workshop for IDA Ontario on January 20th called the Multi-Tiered System of Support. And she showed how you can organize a school so that we're intervening at the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 level with students. All students are remaining on track because they're receiving timely intervention at each tier, because teachers are helping each other with each other's students. And our Una Malcolm, who actually will be our new IDA Ontario president as of June 5th, she created a study guide for us for this full-day workshop that Stephanie Stoller gave. I'll give you more detail about this as I go on. So it's recommended that we remove the inappropriate eligibility criteria for interventions, such as requiring a learning disability diagnosis or that a student not have a coexisting disability. Kids need to be given intervention when they need it, as soon as possible, as early as possible. When a child is in kindergarten or grade 1, it takes 5 months to remediate reading. When a child is in grade 3 or grade 4, it takes 2 years, 3 years to remediate reading if we can. It will always be a struggle if you start at that age. We must start early. To ensure equitable access, any students who meet the criteria should receive interventions. That means if they're shown to be at risk during early screening, they meet the criteria and they receive intervention, period. We need to make improvements to monitor individual student progress and overall effectiveness of intervention approaches. And that's doable. If we're using approaches based on the reading science, there are ways to measure progress. There's a scope and sequence we follow. And we see, can the student read and write the words that he's learning in this scope and sequence? Is he reading words, sentences, and text related to that reading skill? If it's short vowels, 1-syllable words, that's what we're learning to read. In real words, some nonsense words, not that many, sentences with those types of words, and text with those types of words. That's called decodable text, decodable words. That's how we learn to read. If you're following an explicit, sequential, incremental order in reading according to a clear scope and sequence that you have found that meets the needs of the students in your class because of the early screening you did, you will be fine. The kids will learn to read. Most of them will.
Is this a good time to ask a question?
Absolutely, sure.
So there's a couple of questions that have kind of popped up in the chat, and some of these you may have actually already kind of addressed these, but I'll ask them anyway in case you want to expand. So one of the questions was mandatory screening K-2 in the fall as per the ministry memo. Are they going to mandate Acadians or Dibbles, or will boards have to choose from an approved list?
We hope there'll be an approved list. I don't see them mandating one certain product in schools. I don't see that happening. That's not the feeling we've been getting at IDA Ontario. So I think we will be having a choice among tools. I think we will. Is that okay? Yeah,
that's great. And another question asking about decodable texts. Do you have some recommendations for where to go to find them?
Okay. Totally. I can show you right now because I know it's a popular question. If you go to, I'll go to a new share. I'm already in Google, so I'm going to just open IDA Ontario. There we go, idaontario.com. You go to idaontario.com and you go to resources and you go to structured literacy resources. And I'm trusting everyone can see. And here we have decodable books. And click here to learn more about decodable books. Here we go. And we have a list of companies that publish decodable books right here. Right? And we have them in French as well below. Okay. So this is where you can find decodable books. There's a Canadian company called Silisense that is providing really good ones. I really like going here. If you, Flyleaf Publishing has free ebook library. They're decodables. And many schools have Flyleaf, but they didn't buy the teacher's manuals that go with them. It's important to have the teacher's manuals so you do a good job and not use a 3 queuing system with these decodable books. And it's not teachers' fault. They don't know what they don't know. So we need to provide the teacher manuals to go with the Flyleaf books. And so here, I do this with some of my students after I've taught them certain concepts, like the short vowel in 1-syllable words. I will go here. These are consonant vowel constant words or vowel constant words. These are the short vowel words. And we go into the book. There's even homework, free homework. Okay. But, teachers can use these. We go to Teachers Pay Teachers a lot, and there are many good resources in Teachers Pay Teachers, but these are free. All right. So I've gone into these books and my students have read them with me, and they're fantastic. And we can expand on vocabulary. There's Sam, there's Am. This is the very beginning. This is kindergarten, Cam. I am Cam, I am Sam. So am I answering your question? Okay.
Sorry, just looking for my unmute button. I think that answers the question. Thank you. And I've been trying to drop some of the links to those websites into the chat box as you go along too. So.
Okay, did I go too quickly?
No, we're good for now, I think.
All right, good. I'd be happy to continue to help in any way I can. All right. So the tragedy here is that most reading failure is unnecessary. Dr. Louisa Moats, if you could read Reading as Rocket Science, is fantastic. She has co-written the knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading, which we can find in IDA International and IDA Ontario. If one day all of our teachers could adhere to the knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading, all of our students would be reading, almost all of them. All right. With evidence-based instruction, over 95% of our kids can learn to read. And I'm repeating myself again. Implications for administrators in terms of interventions. We need to create a clear structure for RTI or MTSS in our schools. What I found, okay, I've been a dyslexia therapist for 8 years now, and I continue to certify. I have a number I need to study. I have courses I have to take, continuous qualifying, requalifying, recertifying, all this. So I see what's out there, and this is what I'm hearing from parents is their child was referred for assistance, but the team wasn't meeting for another 4 months, or they weren't up on the list for the school team meeting for 4 months because there were so many kids being referred. And I'm going, but why? What's wrong with our system where we have to wait 4 months for a child to be brought up to a team to be discussed? So could we make that more efficient? And of course, it will become more efficient when we do early screening and when we do early intervention. But what about the kids in grade 4 who still have not received intervention, who are still on wait lists to be seen? I'm sure it's frustrating for administrators and teachers. I'm sure it is, because we feel helpless in the face of these kids who are getting depressed and anxious, stomach aches, behavior problems, don't want to come to school, right? These kids suffer. They really suffer. I hosted a webinar recently. I couldn't record it for confidentiality purposes, but I had 3 students with dyslexia describe what they go through at school, with teachers making comments that they don't realize are quite hurtful, being singled out in a class for extra help when they don't want to be so visible as needing extra help. It's such a psychological issue, struggling with reading. And if we can intervene as early as possible, we can prevent all this. So, support your team in responding early with the early screening results. I would like to suggest that instead of whole school team wait lists, could we have division meetings? Could we have, if you have 3 grade 1s in your school, the grade 1 teachers meet and discuss with the resource teacher or the spec ed teacher. Could we reduce that so that we get a better picture of what's going on in the school more quickly, so that we can intervene more quickly? Again, the multi-tiered systems of support by Stephanie Stoller. I'm going to click on this because I want to show you where it is. And I'm going to stop this video because it starts with an advertisement. There it is. I'm trying to stop it. Okay. I'm going to let the ad go. Here. All right. So Dr. Stephanie Stoller, workshop part 1 and workshop part 2. This is the guide this is the guide I was talking to you about, the viewing guide that you will be receiving to view this workshop. It's full day. This lady will give you strategies on how to intervene with students effectively using creative ways in your classroom. I can't stress this enough. It would be excellent preparation if you'd like to attend the August 18th workshop as well. All right. And here we go. Accommodations and modifications. This was the next benchmark. And what was found from a human rights perspective, it is critical that all students who need them have equal access to accommodations and interventions, regardless of their parents' means to pay for private assessments. So I need to move my toolbar a bit so I can see. It was found that systematic explicit instruction in foundational word reading skills in Tier 1, supplemented with evidence-based intervention for students who require more support to learn to read, will result in many fewer students needing accommodations. Accommodations can never be a substitute for timely reading intervention, though. So, or reading remediation. Now, here's what I've been seeing for over a decade. Well, actually, my entire teaching career was we would give computers, but we wouldn't give remediation in reading because we thought these kids, we should just aim for their developing their strengths. We shouldn't focus on their needs or their weaknesses. They can't learn to read, so let's give them computers. And we gave IEPs with no reading remediation, just technology. And I'm thinking, now, how unjust this was for our kids, for my students. So kids can learn to read using the correct science, reading science-based strategies. I just can't stress that enough. IEPs need to have reading remediation. Does that mean that it has to be a modified IEP? Not at all. We can provide reading remediation in regular accommodated IEPs. In fact, if I go back to my PowerPoint, I will show you an accommodation list Hmm. When I get to it, I'll show it to you. It talks about structured learning. That's structured literacy, but I'll go back to it. So modification. Back to, I want to finish this slide. Schools should provide accommodations without delay. It should be accommodations should be implemented consistently by all teachers. Now, these poor French teachers, core French and immersion teachers, when we have students who have IEPs, this happened to me. My first year teaching French as a second language, I was doing extended French. A parent stormed into my classroom because I had assigned homework and I hadn't been told that my student had an IEP, that student struggled immensely with reading. And I was assigning that student French reading for homework. And this parent, she stormed into my classroom saying, "How dare you," screaming in front of all my students. And I deserved that. But the spec ed teacher was not telling the French teachers which students had IEPs and who needed accommodations. Now, how often is this happening in core French? And these poor kids are in core French and they need their accommodations there also. So, and in Rotary, in grades 7 and 8, the science teacher, the math teacher, the social studies teacher, they all need to know that our students need accommodations and all of the teachers have to work together. Better communication with parents about accommodations as well. Some parents don't even understand what the accommodations are. So modifications are not the same as accommodations, of course. There are schools, and the Human Rights Commission learned this, where modifications are given to students in high school, but the parents aren't even aware. And then the students receiving these modifications can't access regular grade level curriculum, which means they can't receive their regular graduation diploma. There are parents who are told this in grade 12. No, your child has been receiving modifications. They can't graduate with this regular diploma. This is happening. And it's quite an injustice to our kids. It's not malicious. It's just that we don't have the structures in place to protect our kids in that manner. And that is going to change, thankfully. Modifications should just be a last resort. Recommendations. We want the Ministry of Education to give greater guidance on the appropriate use of accommodations and modifications. We need to establish a list of effective and accessible assistive technology products and provide the training for these. We need to set standards for IEPs. Different school boards have different standards, different ways of creating them. Some say, "Oh, I know, there's a school board, one of my kids, the kid is on a modified IEP because they didn't want to hurt his feelings by giving him bad grades with an accommodated IEP." Well, no, we want the child to have accommodated IEPs with the right accommodations so they can access grade level curriculum with success. And we can help teachers and spec ed teachers provide this. This can happen. School board transparency and accountability around accommodations and modifications is very important. Teacher training is really important. So implications for, here's the list of accommodations that I was talking about. So implications for administrators. We have in Halifax this principal I was telling you about, who's going to be helping with the with the workshop on August 18th. He did a podcast for Dyslexia Canada called Reculturing Literacy Instruction in Nova Scotia Schools. And this could be very helpful for principals to watch. It's only an hour and a half. And Andrew provides really excellent strategies on how to summon the wealth of knowledge of some teachers who were studying reading science, and he helped them help the teachers in their school and create a network where there was early screening and there was early intervention, and IEPs were written differently, and the speech path helped out a lot. And what a beautiful culture he created in his school. So much so that he has been recruited by the province to create this in other school districts in Nova Scotia. So schools, again, repeating, accommodations should be provided without delay, and accommodations should be implemented consistently by all teachers. There should be communication with parents. And here's this document that I love. And if we go to page 186, I provide this page to many parents, and parents have access to this document. And I provide this document to many of my parents because they need to advocate for their students, their children, often more than one child in the same family, because reading struggles are hereditary. So if we go to page 186, and I know you must be aware of this document, of course. I love it because it's quite clear. And parents love it too, because it helps them understand how IEPRCs happen, how IEPs happen. But here's a lovely list of accommodations that I give parents. And I go through my students' IEPs with the parents, and I go, do you think your child could benefit from this or this or that or this or that? And we go over these. And they go back to the schools and they say, could my child please also have this accommodation? Could my child also please have this accommodation? We try to be realistic because we know teachers are run off their feet, that staffing is limited. But ultimately, learning to read is a right in Canada. And, and we have to try to accommodate our students that way. Sorry, I have to take a drink. Okay. Here, one of the ones, highly structured approach, is the one I really like here. Highly structured approach. Yes. If we are giving remediation in reading with a highly structured approach, we can still provide this accommodation. It doesn't have to be called a modified IEP. A modified IEP is when children are not working at the grade level. And it used to be 2 grades below, then you needed a modified IEP. Now it's same grade with technology to access grade level curriculum, but also provide remediation in reading with a highly structured approach. That's what we want for our students. And that can still be an accommodated IEP. All right. And it can happen in small groups in a tier 2 system in the classroom. Either the spec ed teacher comes in or the regular teacher provides that while her other students are in centers. And everybody's in centers, and he or she is working with in a tier 2 model with their small group, having had training, of course, with a spec ed teacher or with training with someone else in the school. Anyway, going back to our PowerPoint, and I should not have to clean up that scrub. No, I do. Okay, I'm going to clear that scribble to annotate, clear all. Here we go. And back to, now we're with the assessment benchmark. Time check, 5:15. We start at 4. Okay. Why is it that students need psychoeducational assessments in order to receive accommodations or to receive intervention? This has been a big question. So sorry, I clicked on something I shouldn't have. I'm trying to get my slide to move forward and it's not happening. Resume share. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. So the Human Rights Commission is against continuing this practice of needing a psychoeducational assessment before intervention is provided. It should never be required. School boards need to develop clear, transparent, written criteria. Psychoeducational assessments must never be required. Again, I'm repeating myself. Implications for administrators: early screening, early intervention, Meet with personnel and division leaders to review procedures. School team referral process is often slow and inefficient. Consider grade level or division meetings for quicker decision-making about Tier 2 in-class individual and small group intervention. Systemic issues. Here we're looking at the Human Rights Commission saw that there was a lack of transparency and communication for families, and that parents often didn't know about their child's reading development, and there was a lack of effective dispute resolution. Very difficult. These are big systemic issues that are hard to deal with, and that school boards are going to be resolving with the Ministry of Education. I mean, I know that some of you are nodding your heads if you're still there because it's late. But the beauty of this whole situation today is that it's being recorded and you can continue to watch at your own pace. There's a lack of standardization in approaches. There's an urgent need for consistency and provision of clear guidance on how all boards and schools should approach the issues addressed in the inquiry. There's little data available, right? So we must set standards, use data, and provide better transparency. Professional development needs to be provided. Again, teachers are not given sufficient education and support, but we want to change that. Teacher education is going to be changed. Teachers' colleges are going to be experiencing some changes so that the beauty of the new curriculum is that that will be the basis for teacher education in teachers' colleges. And reading instruction will begin to be more efficient because of that. One thing I should tell you is that IDE Ontario provides a course called Basics of Decoding and Spelling Instruction, and it's free for in-service teachers. If you have pre-service teachers in your schools right now, maybe not, yeah, they were done in April, I think. But if you happen to know any, if they're still in pre-service education, they're not teaching yet, they can take Basics of Decoding and Spelling Instruction for free through our website. So we want job-embedded in-service teacher professional learning, resources that address reading instruction, and adequate funding to train teachers. All right, so for administrators, we want transparency and communication with parents. We want to facilitate in-service teacher training. We want resources that address reading instruction. All right, so I just want to click on this Basics of Decoding and Spelling Instruction. Here it is. And it's free for student registration, and it's only $75 if teachers want to take this. We're also offering it in the summer in a facilitated manner. Martha Kovac, structured literacy coach, will be facilitating 2 cohorts every Tuesday in August and every Wednesday in August, 5 sessions each. People can register for one of these sessions, either the Tuesday or the Wednesday. So the facilitated course will also be offered. Back to our slides. So to conclude, the OHRC identified ableism and low expectations for students from certain code-protected groups. There are several sources of historical and societal disadvantage for many students. And when students start school at a disadvantage and then fail to learn this basic skill of reading, it only deepens their disadvantage. We must teach all kids to read. So this is the manual that Una Malcolm has created to study the multi-tiered system of support workshop that is provided. Now, the manual, there is a link to the manual in the final handout, and it has QR codes, but if you don't want to use the QR codes, these links will bring you to the workshop. And I attended this webinar recently, The Science of School Leadership by Patty Montgomery. Excellent. She talks about how principals can support teachers in bringing structured literacy and the science of reading in schools. Really lovely, lovely webinar. Administrator success stories in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba. Dyslexia Canada has a spotlight series. If I'm going to click here, our president, Alicia Smith, is now the executive director of Dyslexia Canada, and she is hitting it right out of the water in terms of providing webinars that are really helpful for teachers and school principals. Implementing the right to read in the Near North District School Board, defending your child's right to read for parents, reculturing literacy instruction in Nova Scotia, barriers, myths, and successes about dyslexia, implementing large-scale system change with Dr. George Georgiou of Alberta. I was telling you, the University of Alberta. Excellent. So I just can't applaud Alicia enough for what she's been doing at Dyslexia Canada. And the wonderful thing is she loves to share with IDA Ontario, and we help each other out with many presentations and resources. Becoming a literacy workshop series in the fall of 2021, school boards, certain principals and literacy leaders in certain school boards showed how they do structured literacy in their own schools. This is the link to find the literacy leader workshop in the fall of 2021. There were 4 of them, 4 webinars. And here, the Louis Riel School Division in Immersion in Manitoba, Education News, and how, describes how they brought structured literacy to their French immersion programs. And so that's that. And here, more resources, the Right to Read report. I give a link to that. Resources for Ontario principals. Now, this is here in this document. Una prepared this for you. And I'm trying to open it. Here it is. Lawrence, can you see the document okay?
Yes.
Good. All right. So here we have podcasts, webinars, books, and articles, all that would be helpful for Ontario principals. I just want to show you that. There are 3 documents that will come with this webinar, and that is the PowerPoint with the speaker notes. It is this document I just showed you, and it is the viewing guide for the Stephanie Stoller workshop, the multi-tiered system of support. And implementing structured literacy instruction in kindergarten. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I have to go back here. Emily Moorhead, this is JK and SK, how she did it in her school. She's become a literacy leader in her school board now. Kate Wynn is in kindergarten, and Martha Kovac, grades 1 and 2, how they implemented structured literacy in their schools. And they give lesson plan templates and many, many other free resources. Reading Rockets, how principals can support their school. I love the Reading Rockets website. It's mediated by Louisa Moats and her peers. You can't have better mediators for a website in terms of reading science and structured literacy. We're very, very lucky. They provide a dearth of free resources. So if principals would like to see this, this is lovely. Supporting reading comprehension development, that's the research article I mentioned before. Reading is Rocket Science, that's the article by Dr. Louisa Moats. It has been translated in French. By the way, this whole webinar today can easily be given in French. If you have any peers who would like to access French resources, I'd be happy to help in that manner. Lifting the curtain on EQAO scores, that's a report that we published after our freedom of access to information queries, where we learned many things about EQAO scores. Is Canada really an education superpower? PISA scores. Response to Cummins. This is, I think, should be a U here. I'll correct it for the final version. Now we have French resources and FSL resources. The Greater Essex County District School Board, French immersion resources, amazing progress that they've been doing with structured literacy there. IDA Ontario, many resources, webinars, and AlphaGraph, which is an excellent free resource that was created by a psychologist and a professor at Laurentian University, André Madar and Alexandre Madar and Michel Miner-Corriveau created these resources. Well, I should click on it. All of these are free. They are a multitude of FSL resources to teach reading systematically in French for immersion and Francophone schools. So, are there any more questions, Lawrence? I know I thought I would take less time, and it's 3 minutes to the end.
The only other, thank you. No, it's okay. Such a comprehensive overview of right to read, the need for structured literacy, and a tremendous set of resources that I'm sure will take folks some time to work through. There's so many. So thank you so much. The only other question I saw there was a question about the basics course that you said was free for teacher candidates, whether ECE students would be able to engage in that as well, or?
I would be happy to approach our board and get consent for that, because they're in kindergarten, these teachers. These ECE teachers are in our kindergartens. They should have access. They're allowed to take it. Well, ECE students, yes. I would say if they email me, I'll arrange for them to do it for free.
Okay. And I have included your email address in the chat box a couple of times, so folks should have that, and it will go out in the resources that we send them after the webinar as well.
Wonderful, Lawrence. I'm so happy that people were able to participate today.
So the last question here says, do you have your crystal ball handy? Because it says, do you know when the new curriculum will actually be released? If you answer this accurately, there's going to be a prize, Joanne.
No, it is a huge crystal ball, and I don't want to break it by predicting. I have to they are working so hard at putting in the last minute improvements to reflect reading science. I am aware of how hard they are working to do it right. So we might not have it we should have it in June. We should have it in June. That's the goal. Okay.
It's good to have a goal.
Yes.
Okay, well, I want to, since we're right near the end of our time, I just, again, going to thank you for really such a amazing overview and a tremendous amount of resources that you've shared today. I'm sure that everyone who's attended and those who get the email afterwards will benefit greatly from your expertise and from everything that you've shared. So thank you so much for being with us today, Joanne. We really, really appreciate it. And I have dropped in the chat box, as has Brad, that the August session that we keep referring to, the registration is not live just yet, but should be there by the end of this week. And Brad will be sending out information to everybody who signed up for today's session. Plus, it'll show up in our bulletin as well as an opportunity for folks to register. So please check back on the OPC website or email me directly if you have questions.
All right.
So thanks everyone for spending some time with us this afternoon. I hope you found the session valuable. And as I said, please check back on the OPC website for other learning opportunities. And we'll see you next time. Have a great evening.